What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
I looked out at a sea of strangers, families with arms around each other, moms dabbing tears, dads awkwardly trying not to smile too wide, kids snapping selfies with mortar boards tilted halfway off their heads, and I waited, eyes locked on the auditorium doors, just in case one of them suddenly swung open and my family strolled in like nothing was wrong. I waited until the very last name was called, mine, and even then, I held my breath for one more second, hoping maybe they were just late, maybe there had been traffic, maybe they cared this time. But the doors stayed closed, the seats in my reserved row stayed empty, and the applause I got when I crossed the stage felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who had people in the crowd. What really gets you isn't the moment they disappoint you, it's how expected it feels. Like background noise. Like a door that never shuts all the way. You grow up learning to rehearse your own letdowns before they happen, so you're not surprised when they show up half-hearted or not at all. My name is Rachel Carter, and I'm 32 years old. It took me over a decade to finish school because life got in the way, or more accurately, my life got postponed so everyone else's chaos could continue uninterrupted. While my younger sister Bree floated through college on what seemed like effortless attention, emotional handouts, and my mom's revolving credit card, I was working 2 jobs and watching her kids when she wanted to take a break from being a mom for a weekend, sometimes for whole weeks. And no one clapped for me then either. Growing up, I learned to disappear quietly. When my father bailed on us before I hit middle school, I became the replacement adult. Not the praised one. Not the celebrated one. The responsible one. The babysitter. The one who knew how to stretch $25 over 4 days with frozen pizza and cereal and a shut-off notice sitting in the mailbox. My mom, Marcia, she wasn't evil. Just unreliable in the kind of way that makes you grow up 2 decades too fast. She always had some new boyfriend or drama to chase. Always said she'd be there and then didn't show, blaming a headache or work or her car or something vague and slippery you couldn't argue with. My birthdays were often forgotten until dinner. One year she gave me a $20 bill and said, "Go buy yourself something cute, okay?" I was turning 14. I spent it on groceries because we were out of milk and Brie had cried over dry cereal the day before. It became normal. That's the part that messes you up. When abandonment becomes just another Tuesday. And I carried that into adulthood without even realizing it. When I enrolled in community college the first time, I didn't tell anyone. When I dropped out 6 months later because Bree left her kids with me again and vanished for 10 days, I didn't complain. When I tried again at 27, it was in secret. I did online classes at night. I kept my head down. I didn't ask for help. It was easier that way, no one could let me down if they didn't know I needed them. But this last round, the one where I finally got my bachelor's degree, I let myself hope. Just a little. I sent the graduation announcement to everyone. I even printed them. Real cards, gold foil edges, my full name, Rachel Elaine Carter, written in elegant script like I mattered. I mailed one to my mom's house, one to Bree, one to Uncle Mike, one even to my dad, wherever he is now, no reply. But I thought, maybe if I do it all the right way this time, they'll show up. Maybe if I play by the rules, if I do it picture perfect, cap and gown, honor cords and all, they'll finally look at me like I'm someone worth clapping for. I showed up early. Sat in the holding room with all the other graduates buzzing with nervous energy, families sending last-minute texts, balloons and flowers already waiting in car trunks. I didn't bring anyone. I knew better. But I still saved 4 seats. Front row. A little hopeful insurance policy I told myself was just in case. And I sat through the entire ceremony pretending like I didn't feel every empty chair like a bruise. They called my name. I walked across the stage. I smiled for the camera, shook hands with the dean, held my degree in one hand and a rising storm of something sharp and bitter in the other. And then, they handed me the mic. It was supposed to be a short speech, nothing fancy, a thank you from the graduating class representative, just a few words to wrap things up. But something in me snapped the moment I saw that empty front row again. I hadn't planned what I was going to say. I'd written a little speech, printed it out in nice font, tucked it in the sleeve of my gown. But I didn't pull it out. Instead, I stared at those chairs, and then I looked out at the crowd, at all the beaming, teary-eyed parents who showed up for their kids, who made time, who gave a damn, and I felt something rise up from a place in me I didn't even know had words. "I want to thank the ones who stood by us," I said. My voice was steady, but I felt it trembling under the surface. "And to the ones who showed up not just today, but over the years you made this possible." There was polite applause. I let it quiet. Then I added, "And to the ones who couldn't be bothered, don't bother now." The room went still. A few people murmured. Someone coughed awkwardly. I smiled, handed the mic back, and walked off the stage like nothing had happened, heart pounding so hard I thought it might rip right through my gown. That's when the call started. By the time I got home, I had 12 missed calls from my mom. 6 from Bree. 3 from Uncle Mike. Voicemails piling up. "Rachel, what the hell was that? You embarrassed the family. You made your mother cry." And I hadn't even said their names. But the truth was, I hadn't said anything I hadn't rehearsed 1,000 times in my head, late at night, folding laundry or microwaving dinner or babysitting someone else's kids while mine, if I'd had any, would have been left behind just like I was. And the strangest part? I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. But what happened next? That's where things get interesting. Because once you stop playing the good daughter, once you say the thing you're not supposed to say, people start showing up. Just not the way you think. When I walked off that stage, my shoes clicking a little too loudly against the wooden steps and my hands trembling just enough to make me shove them into the sleeves of my gown, I knew something had shifted, not just in the room, where the air had gone stiff and curious and uncertain after what I said, but in me, somewhere deeper, like a door that had always been bolted shut had creaked open, just a few inches, just enough to let some light in, or maybe to let something dark crawl out. Something old and wounded that had been waiting too long to be seen. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. It wasn't like some movie ending where the outcast gets her moment and the violins swell, but I felt real, and maybe that was more important, because for the first time in as long as I could remember, I hadn't swallowed my truth to protect other people's comfort. The car ride home was quiet, except for the sound of my gown rustling against the seat and the occasional hum of passing traffic, but even that silence felt different, heavier somehow, like the quiet before a storm, not the peace after one. I hadn't even checked my phone yet. I'd felt it buzzing in my pocket during the ceremony, over and over, a rhythmic little alarm that told me whatever peace I'd had while walking across that stage was already starting to unravel, that the fallout had begun before I even sat back down. But I didn't rush to look at the messages. I didn't owe anyone that. When I got home, still in the gown because I didn't feel like taking it off, still holding the rolled-up fake diploma they hand you before the real one comes in the mail, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the phone, still buzzing like a wasp trapped under glass. 12 missed calls from my mother, 6 from Bree, 2 from Uncle Mike, which was a surprise because I honestly hadn't expected him to even be alive, let alone invested. And 1 from a number I didn't recognize, but had a hunch was someone trying to guilt me under a different area code. There were voicemails too, but I didn't listen to them right away. I just watched the phone light up again and again like it was blinking out some kind of Morse code for regret. Eventually, I listened. Not all at once, just one, the first one from my mom, left not long after I left the mic. Her voice was high and shaky, but not in a remorseful way, not in that way where you can tell someone is calling because they realize they hurt you. No, her voice was angry, not even disappointed, offended, like I'd walked into her house and knocked over the shrine of her self-image she'd been polishing for decades. "Rachel," she said, dragging my name out like it tasted bad in her mouth, "what you said today was uncalled for. You embarrassed me. In front of everyone. I don't know what got into you, but you need to call me back. We need to fix this." Fix this, as if I had broken something by telling the truth, as if decades of silence and absence and shrugged off responsibilities could all be shrugged back on with a single forced apology. As if her being embarrassed outweighed the years I spent trying not to cry at the back of other people's celebrations. I didn't call her back. Not then. Instead, I opened my laptop. I clicked through the pictures a friend had taken during the ceremony, mostly wide shots, blurry smiles, and distant claps, but a few of me at the mic, mouth open mid-sentence, eyes looking somewhere far past the crowd. Like I was finally speaking to someone who wasn't even in the room. I picked one of those photos, the one where I looked the most like myself, not the polite version of me, not the one who shows up to Thanksgiving with a salad and a forced smile, but the one who finally snapped, and I uploaded it to Facebook. Captioned it with the same words I'd said on stage. To the ones who couldn't be bothered, don't bother now. Within minutes, the comments started rolling in. Friends. Former classmates. A few people I barely remembered from high school. Most of them were supportive, some even shared their own stories about being the forgotten one, the dependable sibling, the one no one thought needed cheering on because they seemed fine. One woman wrote, "I felt this in my bones. I sat alone at my own wedding while my mom was at the casino." Another said, "They only show up when it benefits them. Good for you for saying it out loud." I didn't expect it to go viral, not immediately, not the way it did, but by the next morning, the post had been shared over 300 times, and there were hundreds of comments, many from strangers who just wanted to say thank you, or me too. Or I've never told anyone, but this made me cry. And then I started seeing names I recognized, names from my own family. Cousins I hadn't talked to in years. Family friends. My mom's hairstylist from back when I was a teenager. They weren't just reading it. They were sharing it. That's when the second wave of calls came in. "Mom, again, this time more urgent. Rachel, take that post down. You're airing dirty laundry, and it's making people think I was some kind of deadbeat. Do you know what this is doing to me?" And then Bree, in her usual performative outrage, left a voicemail that began with, "Wow, just wow," and ended with, "You should be ashamed of yourself." But what none of them seemed to understand, what they never did, was that the shame wasn't mine. It never was. I wasn't the one who forgot birthdays. I wasn't the one who left a 13-year-old in charge of a crying toddler for a weekend with no food in the fridge and no emergency number to call. I wasn't the one who RSVP'd, maybe, to my own daughter's graduation and then just didn't show up. I wasn't the one who thought family was a word you could use as a weapon. And no, I wasn't taking it down. In fact, I was only getting started. Because if they thought one little speech was a problem, they clearly forgot that I still had years' worth of receipts. Old texts. Voicemails. Photos. Things they assumed I'd deleted or forgotten or buried, but I hadn't. I'd saved it all. Not out of spite, at least not originally, but because some part of me always believed that someday, somehow, the truth would matter. And if they were going to finally pay attention to me now, if it took a little public discomfort for them to realize I wasn't their emotional punching bag anymore, then so be it. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them squirm. Because for the first time in my life, I was done being quiet, and they were finally being forced to listen. There's a kind of quiet that follows confrontation, not the peaceful kind that comes when a problem's been resolved or a wrong has been righted, but a humming, simmering quiet, the kind that buzzes in the background like a power line after a storm, where nothing feels quite safe, and you know something is still coming, just not when or from which direction. After the post about my graduation blew up, and I mean really blew up, with shares climbing past 1,000 within 48 hours and comments coming in from people across the country, some crying out in solidarity and others whispering words of warning, I realized that what I had done wasn't just cathartic for me, it had struck a nerve in hundreds, maybe thousands, of others who had swallowed their pain for the sake of peace and played the role of the good kid until it hollowed them out. At first, I thought I'd feel guilty for the way my words were circulating, screenshots ending up on forums, my name tagged in threads where people were telling their own stories about being forgotten, abandoned, or used, but instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. Like I had finally stopped trying to hold my breath underwater while pretending everything was fine. The messages I received directly, some private, some public, were overwhelming, not just in number, but in their emotional weight. One man wrote that he hadn't spoken to his father since his college graduation in the early 90s, when his dad decided to go fishing instead of attending the ceremony. A woman described how her mother skipped her baby shower because those things make me uncomfortable, and she had never said a word until now. The way people clung to the sentence I had said, to the ones who couldn't be bothered, "Don't bother now," surprised me, because it wasn't some poetic phrase, it wasn't carefully crafted to go viral. It was simply the truth, said aloud, without apology. Of course, my family didn't see it that way. The backlash started slowly, at first just my mother's voicemails escalating in tone, from mildly disappointed to venomously wounded, accusing me of turning strangers against her and trying to destroy her reputation, which was laughable, considering she'd spent my entire life showing me just how little her reputation was worth when it came to showing up for her own daughter. Then came the group texts, cousins, aunts, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly piping up with passive-aggressive comments like, "Family doesn't air dirty laundry," or "You've always been dramatic, Rachel." As though my trauma was a one-woman play I had been workshopping since childhood. But what they didn't expect, what none of them ever seemed to prepare for, was that I wasn't reacting the way I used to. I wasn't backing down, wasn't explaining, wasn't softening the edges of my truth just so they could sleep better at night. I responded with facts, calmly and clearly. I posted screenshots of texts where I had reminded them about the date of my graduation, with timestamps showing that they had seen the messages and never replied. I posted a photo of the 4 empty chairs I had reserved, labeled with their names, no less, sitting stark and unoccupied in the front row of the auditorium. And then I posted one more thing, a video. The video was short, just under 2 minutes, but it cut sharper than anything I'd written. It was me, sitting on the edge of my bed, speaking directly into the camera, no makeup, no filters, just me and the words I had waited years to say aloud. I didn't make this post because I wanted sympathy, I began, my voice steady, my eyes locked on the lens. I made it because I've spent my entire life being quiet while the people who should have loved me chose everything else over and over. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. And just because your family doesn't mean you get to keep hurting someone without consequences. The reaction was immediate. The video was shared 500 times in the first few hours, and my inbox was flooded, some people sharing their stories, others asking how I found the courage to speak up, and a few, predictably, telling me I was selfish, ungrateful, and cruel. But the thing was, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to defend myself against any of it. I had said my piece, and if it made people uncomfortable, then maybe they needed to sit with that discomfort for a while. What none of them saw coming, though, was the photo. It wasn't a new photo, and that was what made it so damning. It was an old, grainy picture from a disposable camera, taken when I was 13, the night of my middle school talent show. I was standing outside the school gymnasium, holding a small plastic trophy in one hand and a slice of cake on a paper plate in the other, my eyes red from crying, but my mouth forced into a smile. No one else was in the frame. No family. No friends. Just me in my thrift store dress, clutching my small victory while waiting for someone who never showed up. My mom had told me she was too tired that night, said she'd had a rough week and needed to lie down for a bit. But when I got home, still wearing my glittery stage makeup and carrying my trophy, I saw the empty wine bottle on the counter and the ashtray full of lipstick-stained cigarettes, and I understood exactly what tired meant. I posted the photo with a simple caption, "This wasn't the first time. This won't be the last." The internet did what the internet does, it shared, dissected, discussed. My post made its way into conversations about generational trauma, about emotional neglect, about how many of us are walking around with wounds we're told to hide because the people who caused them share our blood. Some called me brave. Others called me bitter. But every time someone said I was exaggerating, someone else chimed in with, "No, this happened to me too." And that chorus of voices, those echoing truths, became louder than the ones trying to shut me down. And then, late that night, after the photo had spread, after the comments had reached the hundreds and the shares had crossed 1,000, I got a text from my mother that stopped me cold. "You think you know everything, Rachel. But you don't. Keep going and you'll regret it." No signature. No apology. Just that, a threat wrapped in guilt, disguised as a warning. And, suddenly, I knew something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. This wasn't just about graduation. This was about every time I dared to speak up, every time I'd made her look bad by existing outside her version of the story. This was about control. And now that I had taken mine back, she didn't know what to do with herself. But I knew exactly what to do. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. There's something uniquely painful about realizing that the people who raised you or claimed to have spent more energy curating the illusion of care than actually caring. That they've poured years into shaping a public version of themselves where their failures are conveniently reframed as your shortcomings, your isolation rewritten as your choice, and your pain dismissed as overreaction or attention-seeking. For most of my life, I played along because it seemed easier, because survival sometimes demands silence more than it does confrontation. And because when you grow up watching the people who are supposed to love you twist reality like taffy until they're the heroes of every story, including the ones where you barely made it through, you learn that being quiet isn't just safer, it's expected. But after I posted the photo, that frozen slice of my 13-year-old self, standing outside a school gym under the harsh yellow light of a parking lot lamp, cheeks blotchy from tears I'd tried to hide, fingers clenched around a plastic trophy that should have meant something but only reminded me of who wasn't there, everything changed. I hadn't even meant to start a fire with it. In fact, when I uploaded the image and wrote those 12 words, this wasn't the first time. This won't be the last. I half expected it to get swallowed in the flood of posts already circling my name, buried under noise. But the internet has a strange way of sensing when something is raw and real and quietly tragic. People connected to it instantly, not because they knew me, but because they knew that look on my face, that forced smile, that hollow hope that someone you love will still come through in the last 5 minutes, even when you already know they won't. Within hours, the photo had become the new focal point. Comments rolled in faster than I could keep up, some from strangers who admitted they had similar pictures, moments captured on film that looked happy to everyone except the person in them. One woman wrote that she'd found a Polaroid of her 9th birthday, sitting alone at a table with 10 uneaten cupcakes, because her mom forgot to send out the invitations. A man shared a photo of himself in his Little League uniform, staring into the crowd with a glove in one hand and disappointment written all over his face. People began posting their own childhood snapshots under my thread, images filled with unspoken grief, long-standing wounds, and quiet resignations that they'd carried into adulthood. What caught me off guard, though, wasn't the strangers, it was the people from my own life who started crawling out of the digital woodwork. A cousin I hadn't seen since Bree's wedding sent me a private message that said, "I always knew something was off. I'm sorry I didn't say anything." A woman named Kathy, who used to babysit me when I was 5, commented under the post, "Your mom used to leave you with me for whole weekends and say she was just running to the store." I thought maybe she had some struggles, but I never knew it was that bad. And then came the most unexpected one, a message from my high school English teacher, Mrs. Greer, who I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "Rachel," she wrote, "I remember you. Quiet, bright, tired. You always looked like someone who carried too much on her shoulders. I'm glad you're speaking now. You deserved better." But with every outpouring of support, there was also a parallel current of resentment brewing from the usual suspects. Bree had now taken it upon herself to become the official spokesperson of family damage control, posting cryptic status updates about people who build entire personalities out of victimhood and attention seekers who rewrite history to play the martyr. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone who knew us could connect the dots. Her friends, most of whom knew nothing about our childhood other than what Bree had chosen to share, chimed in with performative sympathy, calling her brave and strong and assuring her that real family knows the truth. And then, because the world loves symmetry, my mother followed suit. She posted a photo too, a filtered, carefully posed image of us from a Christmas 10 years ago, me in a red sweater with a tight smile, her arm around my shoulder, captioned, "No one talks about how hard it is to be a single mom and still be painted as the villain." I did my best. That post got shared by some distant relatives, people who only ever saw us at holidays and thought they knew the story. One even commented, "You were always there for those girls, Marcia. Don't let bitterness erase that." And reading that, watching the lies multiply in real time, I felt something inside me shift, not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but a deeper kind of sadness, The kind that comes when you realize some people will go to their graves insisting they were right, even when the evidence is sitting in front of them, screaming the opposite. But I wasn't about to let her rewrite the story again. So, I posted another screenshot, a text message from just 2 months before graduation, where I had sent her the exact date, time, and location of the ceremony, followed by a hopeful, too polite line, "I'd really love it if you could come. It would mean a lot." She had responded 3 days later with, "I'll check my schedule." And that was it. No follow-up. No question. No confirmation. Nothing. Underneath the screenshot, I wrote, "This is what doing your best looked like." 3 words. No effort. No follow-through. It wasn't explosive, but it was undeniable. And then something unexpected happened, something I hadn't planned for, something that caught me so off guard I had to read the message twice to believe it was real. A woman named Lorraine, who I hadn't spoken to since I was a child, messaged me privately. She had been my mother's friend once, back when I was small enough to still believe birthday wishes came true and that grown-ups never lied. She wrote, "Rachel, I know it's not my place, but I need to tell you something. I was there the night of your talent show. Your mom wasn't sick. She was out drinking with Dave. I told her she should be ashamed, but she said, 'Rachel will be fine.' She always is. I've never forgotten it. I'm so sorry." Reading those words, that direct confirmation that the absence wasn't accidental, that it wasn't a misunderstanding or a missed call but a choice, a deliberate, casual choice to put a man and a bottle over her own daughter, hit me like a slow, burning wave. Not because I hadn't suspected it, but because now I knew. Because now I had proof that my worst assumptions had never been exaggerated, that my memories hadn't betrayed me, that I hadn't been too sensitive, too dramatic, too anything. And suddenly, I wasn't 13 anymore, standing in a parking lot with fake gold plastic and wet cheeks. I was 32, and I was angry. But I was also clear. And with that clarity came a new understanding. This story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever stood alone and wondered why no one came, everyone who had ever swallowed their rage because they were afraid it would make them unlovable, everyone who had ever been told to forgive without an apology. So I did the only thing that felt right. I posted Lorraine's message, with her permission, of course, and added one final caption. "You made your bed. I'm just pulling back the covers." The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier. More uncertain. Because they knew what was coming next. There comes a moment in every long, unraveling war between silence and truth where both sides look around at the wreckage and realize that no one's getting out clean. No matter how many years of forced smiles were performed or how often old wounds were swept under the rug like pieces of broken glass, no one had the guts to clean up. When I posted Lorraine's message, the quiet confirmation from someone who had been there, who had witnessed not just the absence, but the decision, the deliberate shrugging off of a child's once-in-a-lifetime moment, I expected denial. Maybe even retaliation, but what I got was something far more telling and, in its own way, far more cowardly: silence. Not immediate, not total, but the kind of silence that simmers at a low boil, the kind that tells you people are regrouping behind closed doors, preparing their defenses, drafting narratives that will explain why you're unstable, why you're hurting the family. Why everything you're saying has somehow been taken out of context, even when what you're showing is as clear as a text on a screen or a photograph stained with old tears. The family group chat, once buzzing with outrage and false righteousness, went dead. Bree, who had been performing her victimhood with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never been challenged before, stopped posting vague insults and started posting pictures of her kids again, like nothing had happened. As if enough filtered photos and motivational quotes could bury the truth I had dragged into the daylight. My mother didn't respond publicly. Not a single comment, not a single word typed in defense or deflection. But 2 nights after the Lorraine post, just as I was thinking maybe she was finally going to stay quiet, maybe she had finally accepted that her version of events could no longer survive contact with reality, the phone rang. And her name lit up the screen like a ghost I had almost convinced myself I no longer feared. I didn't answer right away. In fact, I let it ring out the first time, then the second, then the third. each missed call tightening a knot in my chest that I didn't want to admit still existed. But on the fourth attempt, something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe a perverse need to hear what excuse she'd come up with, made me pick up. The first thing she said wasn't hello or I'm sorry or even my name. It was this: "You've ruined the family, Rachel." Her voice was sharp, but beneath the edge there was something else, a fatigue that sounded less like regret and more like the exhaustion of someone who finally realized they were losing control. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch out, let her sit with her accusation until finally I said, "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped lying for you." That's when the conversation began to unravel, not like a fight, not like a shouting match, but like two people reading from completely different scripts, hers written in the language of guilt and self-preservation, mine in the hard, unflinching dialect of memory. She said she did her best, said she was young and confused and had no help, and I didn't interrupt, didn't scream, didn't accuse. I just listened. And then, when she asked me softly, almost pathetically, if I would take it all down, if I would delete the posts and let things go back to the way they were, I said the one thing I had never been brave enough to say out loud. There is no going back. There never was. She cried then, real tears, or at least they sounded real. But I didn't soften. I didn't comfort. I didn't fold, because those tears were too late, and the damage they came from was already calcified into the kind of scar you learn to live with, not forgive. I hung up after that, not with rage, not with glee, but with a strange, bittersweet calm, the kind that comes when you realize you've finally stopped asking someone to be something they're not capable of being. But the story didn't end there. 2 days later, I received an email from someone I hadn't thought about in years, a name that arrived in my inbox like a cold wind. Daniel Carter. My father. I hadn't spoken to him since I was 10, hadn't even known if he was still alive, and yet here he was, reappearing in the shadows of the story like a final ghost waiting for his cue. The message was short. No subject line. No grand explanations. Just a few lines typed in plain black text. I saw the video. I heard what you said. I wasn't there either. I'm sorry. There was no attachment, no request for a response, no promise to do better, just that admission, dropped quietly into my inbox like a pebble tossed into a still lake. And for a moment I stared at it, unsure of what I felt. Not relief. Not closure. Something murkier, something complicated and unfinished, the way old hurts tend to be. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I just left it there, unread but not unopened, part of the archive now, part of the evidence, part of the truth I'd spent my whole life collecting. In the weeks that followed, things settled in the way wildfires do, not into peace, but into ash and quiet and strange new landscapes. My social media following grew, not that I cared, and people kept sharing their stories, kept tagging me in posts about family estrangement, about healing through honesty, about finding strength in choosing yourself even when it means burning the bridges that never took you anywhere safe. I found a job teaching, not full-time, not fancy, but working with teenagers who had too many responsibilities and not enough adults who listened. I told them stories. I told them how silence can be its own form of survival, and how breaking it, while terrifying, is sometimes the only way to finally breathe. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the messages had stopped pouring in, I would open that photo of me at 13, the one with the trophy and the too big dress and the shadows under my eyes, and I would talk to her, not out loud, but in my head. I'd say, "You made it." Not because they showed up. Not because they changed. But because you refused to disappear. I didn't speak to my mother again. I didn't hear from Bree, except for one last text that said, "I hope you're happy," which I didn't answer because the truth was, I wasn't happy, not yet, but I was free, and for the first time, that felt like enough. I don't know if I'll ever respond to that email from my father. Some wounds don't need closure. Some doors stay shut, not out of bitterness, but because opening them only lets more cold in. But I kept it, like I kept everything, not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I chose. And maybe one day, I'll write him back. Maybe I won't. But if I do, I already know what I'll say. Don't bother now.